John Hatfield's Love on a Branch Line is now available from BBC Books and the BBC Radio Collection.
A flight on the brink of disaster. A community trapped in a living nightmare. The true story of how Flight 232 fell from the sky and threw a small town into turmoil. A test of courage, faith, and humanity. 1,000 Heroes, beginning Tuesday, 9:30 on BBC One.
The US Open Golf is approaching its climax with Scotland's Colin Montgomery still in contention for the title. Coverage continues on BBC Two now. Here on BBC One, the main evening news at 20 to 10 with Michael Buerk.
Police in Ulster are warning of a spiral of sectarian killings after Protestant gunmen murdered 6 Catholics watching the World Cup in a pub. Fierce fighting in Rwanda as the rebels seize more of the country. And it's a fight to the finish in the second test. Good evening. The police in Ulster say the murder of 6 Catholics in a pub late last night was part of a series of what they described as tit-for-tat sectarian killings. Terrorist groups trying to outdo each other in the enormity of their bloodlust. 2 masked men armed with automatic assault rifles went into the pub at Loughin Island and opened fire on the crowd watching Ireland playing in the World Cup. 6 were killed and 5 more injured. The Ulster Volunteer Force say they did it.
The bell for early mass in Loughin Island. There were special prayers for those shot in the back while they watched Ireland's World Cup football match as flowers in their memory began arriving. The 2 gunmen from the outlawed loyalist group, the Ulster Volunteer Force, walked into the Heights bar and sprayed it with gunfire from automatic assault rifles. The attack was over in seconds. Local people wept openly on the streets of the tiny village, just about the only sign there was. Inside, the scene, in the words of one man, was bloody awful. Most of the pictures filmed by the BBC this afternoon are simply too horrific to broadcast. There would have been more people in the bar, but for a mercy mission by its owner and a number of his regulars. They left yesterday morning for Romania, where they're going to rebuild an orphanage. The owner's brother described the scene inside.
The bodies are piled on top of each other. They were obviously all sitting watching the game, and the gunmen obviously just came in, opened fire, and the people just were shot dead as they were sitting watching the game on TV. It's just beneath contempt of people who could carry out this type of thing.
The UVF said the attack was retaliation for the murder last Thursday of 2 Protestants by a Republican splinter group. Unionists were disgusted at what was carried out in the name of their community.
They use all these excuses, they use all these so-called reasons. It's absolute nonsense. They have their own agenda and they're going down that road.
All the victims were Catholics, among them Barney Green, aged 87, and his nephew Dan McCreener, aged 59. The local MP knew all of the dead. Today he reflected on why the village had been targeted.
An unsuspecting, soft target. These people have come in, I am almost certain they will come from far afield, for their purpose being to kill as many people as possible in the shortest number of seconds, and really that's what it was all about. And there's something wrong with people like that, seriously wrong.
The Northern Ireland Secretary visited Loughin Island this evening, and he directly addressed the killers.
Let's just picture a future conversation that you may have with your daughter, who asks you what you did in your so-called war, Daddy. And you will say, I killed a man of 87. He was sitting with his back to me. He was watching the World Cup. I shot him dead. He was 87. She won't think that the record of a hero, will she?
The UVF murdered 8 people in 48 hours, but the justification for such carnage is spurious, the logic behind it warped. The real motive was to kill Catholics, any Catholics. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Belfast.
There's been more heavy fighting in the Rwandan capital Kigali as rebel forces continue their offensive against government troops. The rebels, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, say they're trying to prevent further massacres of civilians by the army and militias. France has said it's ready to send an intervention force within days, once the UN gives permission.
The small UN force in Rwanda has been doing its best to save lives and has certainly protected tens of thousands of civilians. UN officers on the ground have been asking for more troops and equipment. But the UN force commander, General Romeo Dallaire, has warned that the Rwandan rebels have threatened to kill any French soldiers who come. The rebels are not a force to be taken lightly. Their threat is due to previous French support for the government army, which France helped arm and train. The Patriotic Front rebels are one of the most effective and highly motivated forces in Africa. They have taken 2/3 of Rwanda since the war resumed. Today, the rebels tried to infiltrate the small parts of the capital still held by government forces to rescue their supporters trapped behind government lines. There was heavy fighting in various parts of the city as the rebels shelled government positions. The Red Cross Hospital, the only functioning medical facility in Kigali, was hit by 3 shells. 1 Red Cross worker was killed. The massacres by government militia and the war between the rebel and government armies has caused millions of Rwandans to be displaced. But the rebels have vowed to continue their advance until the massacre of their supporters stops. Mark Doyle, BBC News, Kigali.
Here, one of the candidates for the Labour leadership has attacked some of his colleagues for the part they're playing in the campaign. John Prescott accused them of feeding the press with what he described as certain kinds of bullets.
Mr Blair may have the air of a man with the Labour leadership virtually sewn up and was bolstering his claims this weekend with a confident speech on the future of socialism. But behind his back, some of his supporters are engaged in an increasingly hard-fought dispute over the choice of deputy. Today, the frustrations of one candidate spilled over with a plea for anonymous attacks to stop.
I would make clear perhaps to many of our party people that they should bear that consideration in mind and not perhaps whisper behind their hands and make for difficulties and feed the press with a certain amount of the bullets.
Margaret Beckett's supporters know she's also been privately and at times bitingly criticised by Blair backers who want her rival to win the deputies contest. Perhaps no coincidence then that her pitch today was based on her ability to heal rifts between differing factions.
I have brought into the committee structure, to the campaigning structure of the party, MPs of different views from every shade of the party. Some of them, by the way, people who don't altogether like each other very much.
Mr Blair's challenge is to rise above any dispute and meet the demands for detail. This week he'll release a campaign statement promising Labour will appeal to all sections of society. But the real question of the campaign is whether the close fight for deputy will damage the fabric of the party. This afternoon, one of Mr Blair's supporters questioned Mrs Beckett's durability, another Mr Prescott's temperament. The Prescott camp responded by saying there was no problem between the candidates. There should not be one between the supporters. But there is clearly a potential for behind-the-scenes rancour here that belies all talk of a Labour love-in. Jeremy Vine, BBC News.
Police sealed off parts of central London this afternoon to prevent protesters against the Child Support Agency from demonstrating in front of the Houses of Parliament. They'd gathered illegally after being refused permission to stage a rally in Trafalgar Square. It's the latest in a series of demonstrations by aggrieved fathers who accuse the CSA of being unfair. And now, with the stage set for an exciting final day in the Test, a close finish in the US Open Golf and the rest of the sport, Ellen Rollison.
New Zealand have set England a target of 407 to win the second Cornhill Test at Lord's. If they do, they'll have set a new record for a side batting last in a Test. Even so, the openers Mike Atherton and Alex Stewart set off apparently determined to achieve it.
Against all expectations, New Zealand had already made a redeeming mark on this series even before their openers went in a blissful 195 runs to the good. And their contribution to a fascinating Test had a further early twist as they threatened to throw it all away. Philip de Freitas again demonstrating his value as England's only bowler possessing real penetration. What's more, he proved it again next ball. Rutherford gone, 9 for 2, and soon complete disaster threatened as Crowe meekly departed at 29 for 3. But unlikely hopes of possible English victory were promptly banished by Young in an innings that was solid but never stolid. And with the dashing Fleming picking up the tempo, New Zealand were quickly in pursuit of a declaration total. Though he lost Fleming for 39, Young went purposefully on, intent on compiling a target beyond England and reaching a precious century at Lord's. He deserved it, but didn't get it, smartly snapped up by Hick, 6 runs short. But the job had been done, and the declaration came with New Zealand 406 ahead. England certainly set out as if the target was realistically attainable, sprinting away at 6 and over. At the close, they'd already made 56 without loss. It should be a compelling day tomorrow. Kevin Geary, BBC News.
Ireland's World Cup heroes have been resting today after celebrating their 1-0 victory over Italy. The team have flown back to Florida, where tonight they're watching their next opponents, Mexico, play Norway. But one of the biggest challenges facing the Irish players could be the heat and humidity in the Orlando Stadium. From Florida, Rob Bonnet reports.
At New York's foremost Irish football bar, an atmosphere that came very close to the intensity of the stadium itself. That, of course, was the goal. These, the pictures of anxiety under Italian counter-attack. And this, the moment as Jack Charlton acclaimed Ireland's first ever 90-minute victory in the World Cup finals and their first ever over Italy. In the early hours, the team arrived back in Orlando, Florida, tired but still jubilant over the result that's put Ireland in a position from which non-qualification for the knockout stage would be a deep disappointment.
It was a really good day. We really enjoyed it. Our support was, well, incredible. It was one of the best, I'm sure, the best atmosphere I've ever played in.
But the heat and dehydration remains the tournament's predominant issue. Jack Charlton was unhappy that he couldn't reach his players with water, and Tommy Coyne on his return was clearly the worse for wear. Today, though, the team doctor was confident of full recovery.
Those that are up this morning are in great form. They don't show any signs of wear and tear from the very hard game.
Meanwhile, at Orlando's Citrus Bowl, crowds gathered for today's match between Morocco and Belgium. Temperatures again were reaching the 90s. This, the stadium, and these, the likely conditions for Ireland's next game. Rob Bonnet, BBC News at the World Cup.
Temperatures are also soaring at Oakmont, Pennsylvania, where Scotland's Colin Montgomery is hoping to become the first British player for 24 years to win the US Open Championship.
It's golf's equivalent of the greenhouse effect, soaring temperatures, high humidity and rising pressure for the young tournament leader Ernie Els, whose opening shot indicated plenty of jangling nerve beneath the calm exterior. His two-shot lead quickly evaporated as Curtis Strange, champion in 1988 and 1989, drew level with 3 birdies in succession from the 3rd hole. Either Els or Strange could match the early charge of Colin Montgomery. 2 shots behind at the start, he birdied the 4th and then the 7th with this spectacular effort.
That looks very good. All right.
And when Els missed at the 8th and Montgomery birdied the 9th to recapture the outright lead, his relief was obvious. But Montgomery's hopes of becoming the first British player to win this event since Tony Jacklin in 1970 began to fade at the 13th when he found trouble and dropped a shot. But it was a late charge by the little-known American Lauren Roberts which suddenly gave the US Open a more traditional feel. A short time ago, he led by 1 stroke and 2 from Montgomery. Neil Oughton, BBC News.
And the US Open Golf continues on BBC Two. Mike.
And the main news again, police in Northern Ireland have warned of a spiral of sectarian killings after Protestant gunmen murdered 6 Catholics in a village pub in County Down. That's all from the newsroom tonight. From Helen and from me, good night.
Hello, good evening. The high humidities and heat affecting sportsmen and spectators in the state shouldn't affect those at Wimbledon or the cricket during tomorrow, but we should expect some spells of warm sunshine in the afternoon. As for tonight, the cloud is spreading out, spreading eastwards across England and Wales, bringing 1 or 2 spots of drizzle, heading northwards, bringing drizzle and rain through Northern Ireland, Western and later on through northern areas of Scotland. So most of us turning out cloudy by morning, but that blanket of cloud at least keeping it mild, indeed even fairly warm in the south. Now as for tomorrow, trapped between these series of weather fronts, we're in for a run of southwesterly winds. Now, they'll be fairly fresh or even strong across Northern Ireland and Scotland, and later on in the day get quite gusty across Northern England too, bringing cloud and drizzle and rain around the north and west of Scotland and Northern Ireland. It'll be generally cloudy to start the day anyway, but later on, particularly into the afternoon, it should brighten up with spells of warm sunshine coming through for many parts of England, Wales and even eastern Scotland. Temperatures at their highest in the East Midlands.
The cook's got leave. The crew don't like it.
Sweeping Egg McMuffins off the floor at the age of 16 does not make me a chef.
It's worse. There's an old score.
Is this something I should know? We're talking about Joe 90 here, not Joe Fraser.
I want my life back, Drew.
All at Sea, Roughnecks, Thursday, 9:30, BBC One.
The New Radio Times contains an extensive weekly listings guide and includes previews and features on forthcoming BBC television and radio programmes. As Parliament considers the imposition of harsher penalties for racially motivated crime, tonight's Heart of the Matter in half an hour travels to Boston, Massachusetts, where such laws already exist, but where, according to some, they actually make things worse. Before that on BBC One, Magnus Magnusson and Mastermind.